This time on the Call of Bilal, why African Americans need to learn more effectively how to do for self. In this country, white people have never really had a good grasp over the conditions that African Americans have faced. Like the feelings, what it's like living in that condition. If you go back to Frederick Douglass, when we look at how Frederick Douglass lived, Frederick Douglass was born a slave, and he achieved his freedom, and then he became one of the most powerful voices speaking out against slavery. He was a speaker on the lecture circuit. He was able to influence small people all the way up to big, powerful, influential people, and he even was able to advise Abraham Lincoln, who was the president at the time. So Frederick Douglass is no small man in the history of the freedom struggle. He's one of the pioneers, one of the giants in the history of our freedom struggle. But when he went on the lecture circuit and he was explaining the horrors of slavery, many of the white audiences that he was talking to did not believe how bad the situation was when he explained it. Is somebody who had the scars on his back. This is somebody who had the practical experience. He lived it. He's seen it. This is somebody who knows firsthand how horrible the situation was, but many of the white people that he spoke to refused to believe how bad it was until he was able to show them the laws, the documents that were written by the hands of other white people as consequences for breaking certain laws. Like, for example, if a slave was caught knowing how to read, he would get his eyes gouged out. If a slave was caught knowing how to write, he would get his hands cut off. If he was caught teaching other slaves, other black people, he would get his tongue cut out. Things like that, and others. But it wasn't until Frederick Douglass was able to show them what was documented by other white people that they actually began to really believe how bad the situation was. It was not from his practical experience and what was coming out of his mouth, no matter how real it was. Now, fast forward. There was a Gallup poll taken, and Tim Wise talks about this. It's someone you should look up if you're unfamiliar to these types of discussions, or if you need more edification around these types of discussions. Tim Wise is an excellent resource. So he talks about these Gallup polls that were taken, and I believe one was like around the mid-90s, and it was asking people around the country their thoughts about how far we've come in terms of race and discrimination. And what the poll found was that the majority of white people felt that we had gotten past an era where race was a problem. It was no longer a big deal, and they did not understand why people kept talking about it so much. They thought we had gotten past it. And the majority of black people felt as though we did not get past it. It's still a very relevant consequence in our lives. It affects us on a day-to-day basis. It affects the opportunities that we have to get ahead and achieve more. Now, that same poll was was given back in the 60s, before the riots and the marches, and before the country blew up with those circumstances back in those times. And when the same questions were asked, it was very, very, very similar to the results that were found. Most white people believed that race was no longer an issue, that we had gotten past it, and that it did not hold back anybody, and most black people felt the opposite. And so, looking from now all the way back to when slavery was actually still in full swing, and Frederick Douglass was on the circuit speaking out against it, fighting for the abolitionist movement, the power structure has never, the ones in authority and influence and in position to give of their graces to other citizens and people, those white authorities, white people in power, white people in position of authority and influence, the general white population, most of them have never believed the experiences of black people, have never believed, have never been able to conceptualize how hard it is for African Americans. Never. It's never been able to happen. And so there's always some who can, but by far the majority has always not been able to see it. And so we can't depend on handouts. We can't depend on them to all of a sudden see it now. We can't depend on marching and protesting and putting pressure on them for them to give us of their good graces. We have to do for self. We have to be able to stand up for our own selves and take our destiny in our own hands. And we have to be able to achieve and demonstrate the value of our own lives. We have to have that. The hand that is giving, the hand like this that's giving, is so much better than the hand that's like this receiving. It's a more dignified position to be in a place where you can give others charity and you can give out of your good graces than to be somebody who is constantly depending on others. Now, if you have a people who have been in power for hundreds of years and another people who have been completely subservient and dependent upon that people for hundreds of years, there's going to be a natural disdain. There's going to be a psychological imprint on the people in power that says these people have never grown up. I resent the fact that these people for hundreds of years have never been able to get themselves. I see people coming from other countries, and I see that within a generation or two, they're independent, they're on their own, they're thriving. But these other people, no matter how, for hundreds of years, they have never been able to get it together, and they're constantly depending on me to hand out to hand out of my good graces. I can't find a way to respect them that much because they're not doing anything that's worthy of respect. I see other people doing it. Now, this is a psychological imprint that's in place. And the only way that we can change that psychological imprint and get them to start respecting us more is if we actually stand up and do something for ourselves. And we know that there's reasons. We know that there was some substance in us that was stripped out and that has never been replaced. And that's why other people are able to prosper more than us and achieve success more than us at a more rapid pace than us, because there was something that was strategically and systematically removed from us to keep us down and subservient. That was taken from us, and we have never completely gotten it back. But it's at a point where, and it's been at a point where we can't depend on anybody else to put that in us. We have to get off this welfare mentality, and we have to get off this idea that we need somebody to do something for us and we need to do it for ourselves. If we want real power, we need an economic base. We need an economic floor. We need to be able to generate money. We need to stop asking for handouts and build some businesses and do for self. Because when we have an economic foundation, when we have an economic floor, then we can put our own politicians in power. And until then, any politician, black or whatever, that goes into power, if we don't have the economic backing to support them throughout the duration of their term, then they're being supported by other people, and anything that they give to us is just a charity and a handout because they're really working in the interest of those people who are backing them and supporting them. Okay, so if we want to real have political power and influence, then we need to get our business life right so that we can have our own politicians. Even if politicians come up with our interests, when they get into office, they're in that office alone and they don't have our support because we don't have the togetherness, we don't have the financial wherewithal to keep them there and to keep them from bowing down to the influence of other people. Like they're on their own. They're on their own. And people who we put in power should not be in office on their own. They should be a representative of us, and we should be able to get ourselves to a point where there are real consequences for not addressing our needs. There are real consequences, meaning it's not just, we shouldn't just say, we are citizens, we live here, and we're human beings, and because of that, we have a right to deserve to be given certain concessions. No, that's begging. That's asking for a handout. That's depending on the good graces of somebody else. We should be in a position where we can say, we have this much money feeding the life of this community, and if you don't give us what is favorable and in our interest, if you don't give us what we're asking for, we are going to shut this operation down. And it should be to the point, if we build up an economic foundation that's powerful enough, then if we threaten to shut something down, I mean, it's really like you flick a switch, it's shut down. People are hurt because we're responsible for that much of the life of the community, that much of the life of the business world, that much of the life, that much of what holds everything together. And real power is when you can control and influence institutions. And you have the power to, if somebody is, if the authority that's over you putting policies into effect, if they don't need you, if they don't need you, then they don't really have to answer to you. But when you say we're responsible for this much money going into the economy, we're responsible for these institutions holding up the life of this neighborhood, we're responsible for this segment of the business world, and if you don't give us what we're going after, then we're going to take that from you, and you're going to be a lamb being led to the slaughter. You're going to be on your own. Okay? And we'll put our power and influence behind somebody else who's going to come in and remove you from your position of authority because you don't have respect for us. We don't need to ask for handouts. We need to command respect. We need to command respect based on the accomplishments that we have. So we need to do for self. We need to stop playing and stop waiting for other people to start respecting us, because there are psychological perceptions in place. People are not going to just give up those imprints that have existed for hundreds of years just because we say we're human, just because we deserve it. It doesn't work like that. Yes, we deserve it. Yes, we're human. Yes, everybody has a right to be respected. But the fact of the matter is that we're not, and we have to take it, just like everybody else who comes. Everybody else who comes and builds a life for themselves here, they build up some authority. They build up a foundation. They have an economic floor, and they have a unity, and they can command respect. They can command that their circumstances are respected, and they can do that because of the pressure that they put on, and they're not depending on anybody for a handout. Whether you give us a handout or not, we should be able to handle our business and live our lives successfully. We need to get off this welfare mentality and do for self. Okay, after we march on DC and after we march on Washington, we should be able to come back and march through our neighborhoods and demand that we be more responsible with and for each other. We should be able to march through our neighborhoods and demand that the people in our neighborhoods that are violating the dignity of our neighborhoods and making us look bad, we should be able to demand that they clean up, and we should be able to clean them up. We should be able to clean up our neighborhoods in spite of them. Okay? So we need to do for self. And when we get done marching and asking for handouts, we need to come back and march in our own areas for us to do for self and to build up an economic floor, an economic foundation, and a life of sustainability that we control. We need to do that, and then if we ever have to march and we have a position of power and influence, it will be so much more effective. But until then, let us focus on doing for self, and let us focus on not trying to get handouts, but positioning ourselves where we command respect and demand respect, and we have a dignified position as people who can stand up in the world next to any other people and hold our own. That's it. That's my thoughts for the day. Like, comment, share, subscribe, tag somebody. Get the word out. We need to do for self. Peace.